Welcome to The Explainer. So glad you're joining us today because we are going to objectively unpack a truly radical, highly controversial text. It's called Fire at Traditions, and it's by an author named Su Feng. Now, regardless of where you stand on everyday societal norms, analyzing how different ideologies build their arguments, that is always a fascinating exercise. Exploring these extremes really helps us understand the mechanics of radicalization and ideological manipulation. Today, we're going to break down a text that literally attempts to dismantle one of the most universally accepted institutions in human history, the traditional family unit. Let's see exactly how the author builds this argument step by step. Okay, let's dive right into this. The author doesn't really ease us into his premise at all. He comes right out of the gate with a pretty jarring use of a biblical verse, quoting Matthew 10:36, "Everyone's worst foes shall be from their own households." He uses this specific quote to anchor everything that follows. Su Feng points out that Jesus Christ warned he came not to send peace, but to turn sons against fathers and daughters against mothers. By starting here, he's immediately laying down the foundation for a massive ideological shift. And that foundation sets up a pretty startling question, one that frames the whole radical premise of what we're examining today. Is family a path to hell? Now, most of the world views the family home as a sanctuary, right? A place of safety and support, but Su Feng's text argues the exact opposite. He claims that relatives, in the traditional sense, are actually enemies. He says they act as a resistance to heaven and a direct path to hell. It's a complete inversion of how society traditionally views family bonds. Moving into the first section of the text, titled A Sword to the Family, unpacking the biblical justification. Let's look at how the text attempts to justify dismantling those familial bonds. According to the source material, the author interprets Jesus' words as a literal, actionable call for children to leave their parents and parents to leave their children. The text argues that anyone who loves their family members more than the divine just isn't worthy. So he uses the imagery of the sword not as some spiritual metaphor, but as a direct mandate to sever familial ties entirely. And here's where the text makes a massive pivot. The author, Su Feng, makes the monumental claim that he is the modern incarnation of Jesus Christ in this age. This is absolutely crucial to the document's architecture. He claims he's here to bear witness to those ancient teachings, to proclaim they're true, and importantly, to personally implement them. His stated goal is to fulfill those final words and physically take the children who have left their parents and parents who have left their children into what he calls the kingdom of the greatest creator. This brings us to Section 2. The prison of parental love. Grievances against the family unit. So, you might be wondering, why does the author categorize relatives as enemies? Well, he methodically lists out his grievances, claiming that parents have essentially kidnapped their children for millennia, all under the guise of love. Listen to these specific arguments directly from the text. He argues that parents treat children as private property, basically preventing them from choosing their own lives. He claims they impose their own unfulfilled wishes onto their kids, selfishly rely on them for old age care, blame them for their own incompetence, and control them using this toxic mix of promises and threats. The author paints a picture of the family not as a nurturing environment at all, but as a restrictive, manipulative system of control. To really drive this point home, Su Feng uses a stark metaphor we're probably all familiar with. He writes that marriages and families are the pots for boiling frogs in warm water. The text argues that everyone inside a traditional family structure is slowly, unknowingly being boiled down into what he calls the animal world and hell. He makes the sweeping claim that nobody who lives their entire life within a traditional family structure can ever reach heaven. All right, jumping to Section 3, Formatting the Failed Program, a History of Blood and Tears. Moving beyond just the individual family unit, the author zooms out to look at the entirety of human history. The crucial number here is 5,000. He claims that 5,000 years of human history, from ancient times to modernity, all across the globe, is entirely a history of failures. He writes that it's a bitter history filled with blood and tears, and crucially, he argues it was personally brewed and written by the institutions of marriage and family. He goes so far as to assert that any preaching that maintains the traditional family is actually the devil's preaching. Following that logic, the author argues that repeating these 5,000 years of failure obviously won't bring success. His warning is incredibly severe. If traditional familial relationships don't completely disintegrate, the sea of human suffering is just going to continue boundlessly. He posits that humanity will face ultimate disaster, or even outright extinction, if we maintain this civilization. The only way forward, according to him, is to thoroughly format, like you'd wipe a hard drive, all of these failed programs of marriage and family. Which leads us to Section 4, the kingdom's new program, a utopian alternative. So if the family has to be destroyed to save humanity, what exactly comes next? The text outlines his grand solution, what Xu calls the new program. He defines this as a society completely devoid of traditional marriages, families, and family affections. This new program is located in his aforementioned kingdom of the greatest creator. Now, he acknowledges that parents and children might instinctively want to scold him or deny this, but he claims that people living in this new program will testify that it's thousands of times more beautiful than traditional family structures. He insists that unless you've lived deeply within it, it's impossible to imagine, but claims it as factual truth. And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer contrast we're looking at today. On one side, you have the traditional, widely held view across almost all human cultures that the family is the foundational building block of a healthy, functioning society. On the flip side, we have Xu Zhifeng's view, presented in this text, arguing that family is literally the devil's preaching, a system of kidnapping and manipulation that guarantees human failure, and that it absolutely must be replaced by his new program. Now, the author isn't naive to how radical this all sounds. In the text, he explicitly acknowledges that the traditional program of family is extremely powerful. He knows people are going to fight against his new ideology and try to destroy it. But notice his detached, almost defensive stance here. He says, "My business is its construction, and if you want to destroy it, that is your business." He claims he's merely using facts to prove that following his teachings, which he aligns with Jesus Christ, is the only way humanity can enjoy beautiful lives for 1,000 years and enter heaven. Which brings us to the author's final ultimatum. He writes, "Believe it or not, you can choose for yourself. Those who believe it are blessed, but those who do not believe it will witness the results for themselves." It's such a fascinating look into the mechanics of radical ideologies, isn't it? When a belief system asks you to completely abandon the most fundamental human bonds, like the love between a parent and a child, in exchange for a promised utopia, where exactly do we draw the line between liberation and total control? What really happens to a society when its foundational building blocks are actively formatted and deleted? Definitely something to think about. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.